Doc, we all know Doc. He's been with us here at this conference as long as I've been here. And this past year has been particularly interesting. I don't know how many of you have been following or received his email newsletters with respect to the conversations that he's been having through the Compression Institute. And if you haven't been, I would recommend that you do so, because he's had some people on his calls and they're talking about some very deep and substantive issues. They're systems thinkers, they're broad thinkers, they go across multiple boundaries. And I asked him to come today and to do a little bit of talking with us about some of the content and some of the ideas that have come out of these conversations that they've been having.
I'm going to take you, I'd say, a little further in the same direction. Bottom line of this, I may not follow the slides. Bottom line of this is, how do we begin to think very differently? And the conversation so far has presumed we got to make money. That's the assumption. And it dictates everything we do. And if you're in business, you know that. You got to take in a little more money than you spend, or you got a real problem. And that's the system. So I'll go straight to the bottom line and back up. Can we figure out how we look at what we do from the viewpoint of nature, naturally? Take that as the first view, instead of looking at nature from the viewpoint of the business. That's really tough. So we've been having conversations about that. A couple of the other presentations that reminded me of kind of some Yogi Berra comments. One from Yogi is, if I understand it, it's simple. If I don't, it ain't. Another one was a farmer near the Indianapolis airport. They used to lease the property for farmers. I talked with this guy one day, and people were running every which way. And he was having trouble navigating his equipment in and out. His comment to me is, how come all these damn people got to be someplace they ain't? And pretty good insights if you listen to the people at the bottom of the pile. So listen to the people at the bottom of the pile. And a good many of them will say, the solution to this is not going to come from business because they can't get out of their own thinking. It'll come from communities that got to figure out, how do we take care of ourselves? And a smart business will help a community do that. And the community will learn to live pretty well and use a lot less if they are smart. And if they are faced with that, they'll get pretty smart pretty quick. Now, how do you do that? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a village in Alaska called Kivalina. You may have heard of it. They've been in the news a few times as the United States' first climigrants. That's somebody that has to move because of climate change. This little village figured it has to move within 10 years. They've known that for probably 15 years. So what's the problem? That was Kivalina in summer. This is Kivalina a little late in winter when there's enough light. It's above the Arctic Circle, enough light to take a photo. You want to live there? Close to 400 people do. Inupiaq, that's the tribe. There are others, mostly Inuit, in the islands and other villages. There are several that will have to move. This one is top of the schedule, but it's a tough schedule. This is the problem. Less sea ice lets the waves hit. It's eroding that little spit of land. And so something's got to give. And I thought at first this was a house from Kivalina. It's another village, but that's the problem. And so it can't last much longer. So go back and look at that one. What do you see? A lot of stuff. Oil tanks, propane tanks. That's not Eskimos living in igloos. Now, about 1900, you would have seen that. This place was built because in 1905, the Bureau of Indian Affairs built a school there. Why did they build the school there? It was an easy place to reach and drop off building equipment by sea. It was not a place they originally picked. They were smart enough not to want to winter out there, but that's where the school was. In the 1950s, they mandated that all Native American children should attend school. Now then, you got to live close to the school. Before that, they were pretty migratory or nomadic. They went wherever nature told them to go to find sea life, or in the summertime, they would gather various things. The education was different. So some of this I got from an elder of the tribes of Alaska. He didn't live here. He was out on an island. His history is significant too. He was voted off the island. Now this was kind of a promotion. Why? Because the decrease in sea life would not support all the people they were getting. That's happened over and over. But he described his education. He's about as old as me. He was one of the last educated until the age of 13 or 14 by the Native American method. So at age 5, you no longer play all day with the kids. You follow your elders and you do what they do. And so at about that age, he went to sea the first time. He fell asleep. He was assigned a mentor, not his biological father. Said the man didn't say more than 200 words to him in 6 years. Usually only when he asked a question. So his first question is, how do you stay awake? And the answer was, you must learn to think about nothing. He didn't know what that meant, so he tried. He found out that nothing meant you have to be alert to everything going on around you. And he got a little better. The next year he went out. He could stay awake then. And they were hunting sea otter. All of a sudden, nobody had said anything for a long time. They're out of sight of land. And one of them whispered, "He is coming." And instantly, all the men in the boat looked at the same spot in the sea. So he asked another question. How did you know to look there? And the answer was, you must learn to think about nothing. Well, he practiced. The ones that practice learn to navigate long distances without any GPS. They can tell where they are by the wave action. And their next question is, why are you so stupid that you need a GPS? You just learn how to do this. Another significant difference, when they caught the sea otter, they gave thanks to the sea otter for sacrificing itself to them. I compare that to the hunters I see now in Texas, pseudo-hunters. They pay to hunt. If they don't catch a deer, they'll take them out, release some doves, and they can shoot one or two of those. And then they're a big winner. What kind of illusion do we have in all this story? Now back to Kivalina and their move. Among those people, there's probably a stronger spiritual connection to feeling part of the earth than there is in anybody in the room. But over time, they collected all this stuff. The Corps of Engineers has estimated it would cost $1 million a person to move that village. Well, they don't have that kind of money. There's no way they could come up with that kind of money. And so the attitude is, we are subsidizing this way of life. Why should anybody do this? Well, not an easy answer. They're caught between the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Corps of Engineers, Alaskan bureaucracy. They sued the oil companies and lost. They sued the oil companies for enough money to move the village. The verdict was that this is not a matter that is legally solvable by current law. It's still a political issue, therefore remand it to somebody else. And there it sits. The politicians are working on this now. I don't know whether they'll come up with anything. And recently they have collected maybe $25, $30 million to move not just this village, but 4 of them. That doesn't get you very far. Now then, just look at that. And now what's the problem? They advanced themselves into a pickle they can't get out of. So you can relate that to what software people sometimes call technical debt. You piled up so much advanced work, there's no way to do it. And if you pile up enough technical debt, you have what? Vaporware. And that happens. Kind of leave that story at that point. And what's the point? We got to learn how to think very differently. Some of the people I talk with at a very different meeting say you're not going to do anything with the technology except pile up more trouble for yourself until you can think very differently about it, about what you're trying to do. Why can't we learn to apply the technology to help nature and us instead of thinking, here's what we need to do, need in quotes. Why do you need it? Our grandfathers in the Midwest lived all summer without air conditioning. Why the hell do you need it? Are you such a pansy that you can't do that? I walked to school. It wasn't very far, actually. A lot of kids did. Now then, you need a bus to take them to the gym. Why do we need the stuff? Then why do we need the software to control the stuff? And so, can we turn the thinking around and say, what's the real problem? And the conclusion is the biggest problem we got is us. Why do we want all the stuff? And much of the conversation is, how do we keep all this stuff going? If you compare the villager's life, 100 or more years ago, far simpler. They were busy all the time, but nobody had to take care of them. Nobody had to subsidize anything. What's really being subsidized? That pile of stuff. And so what we have is not so much a problem of us surviving, it's us wanting to survive with all of our stuff. And how do we work on that? And so, I'll conclude the remarks at that, and we can talk about that subject if you're interested. You can read the rest of the slides yourself.
Well, if you guys are like me, Doc just sent you off thinking about 10,000 different things. No.
Just a comment that you alluded to, an old photo comic. We have met the enemy, he is us.
One of the things in this light, going back to last year and David Brin, that I think about, thank you, the Fermi paradox. You guys remember that from last year? The Fermi paradox? Fermi was a physicist, right? I'm a little bit out of my territory here, but he asked the question, we know that there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of other planets like ours in the universe. Why have we not picked up a signal from other life? You know, we've been broadcasting for quite a while now. Why have we not seen anything out there? Why is it quiet? And one of the answers that comes back is that most intelligent species seem to potentially get to a point, like all life, it uses as much energy as it can to grow. This is what happens in all ecosystems. We came across an amazing energy source. We're growing like mad. Fermi paradox sort of comes back with the notion that, well, maybe other species hit a point where they reach a point in their Earth, their planet, their biosphere, whatever it was that gave them life, and then they crash because they don't get past this point. And so the different way of thinking, I think, that is at the heart of this is it goes to the heart of Western civilization. We've crawled up out of the mud, if you will. We have so many conveniences now, including air conditioning that's just got me freezing over here. I mean, I'm just shivering. We're not going to get off this planet. I don't think. We have these dreams of going to space. The escape velocity, the amount of energy that it takes to get something off this planet, the distances are immense. We have this, so our whole thought process about what we are in relation to Earth is backwards. And that's, I believe, the key to change. And here's the funny thing, I think. We are so resistant based upon our worldviews and our biases, and yet our minds can flip in an instant. And the religious people understand that. That's a religious conversion. It can happen in a second. So I'm sorry, he got me thinking about a whole bunch of things, and there's another 9,999 I could run off with, but I'm not going to. John.
At this symposium a couple of years ago, Doc, you talked about the Petri dish.
Yeah.
Okay. And that we weren't going to do anything until we hit the edges. Where are we at now? I know you had a small diagram in there. We weren't looking good, but I'd just like to talk about that.
Well,
again.
you can take use of materials from ores, you can take petroleum, you can take anything, and peak isn't like what you'd get if you're pumping it out of a tank. It's where do you get to a point where you're spending more energy to get it than you're going to get out of it. And that's all beside the point of how much carbon you put in the air. And so the best source I know for runouts is a guy named L. David Roper. He's a retired professor of physics, Virginia Tech. You can look up his site. Even if you allow for recycling, and you lose some each time you recycle, most of the stuff we use, known deposits, would run out in the 21st century. And so something very different has to happen. It probably has to start happening pretty quickly if we are to maintain the current level of the style of life to which we would like to remain accustomed. And so something very different would happen. About has to. Now his calculations may be off. Everybody agrees he's got about the best methodology. But something very different could happen there.
As near as I can tell, reading a lot of stuff, nature cycles. A few years back, we had a thing called the Great Ice Age, in which a whole bunch of people died. And a few that were smart enough to survive seeded us. And 1,500 years before that, we had a great lack of water, a climate problem, and a whole bunch of people died. So why is it that we're bothering ourselves today about trying to screw up the earth to preserve the way we want to live, instead of simply recognizing that we're building too many people every year, and we better stop doing that, or a whole bunch of people are going to die?
Yeah. A little sidelight on Kivalina. They really are at wit's end. And another part of this tangle, the bureaucratic one, just last night, the son-in-law, the lady I was talking with, is a lawyer in Alaska, and his specialty is working on these problems. They're all lawyered up. Where does that get you? It's not getting anywhere. You got to change attitudes.
Mother Nature wants them to migrate,
Yeah?
so why in the world do we try to hold them on that island?
Yeah, you know, and if it had been 100 years ago, they'd put everything they had in the UME Act and gone where they wanted.
There you go.
Law, unintended
They were
consequences.
humming on the way.
Yeah.